Hello everyone, welcome to the Mysterious Stories channel, where you'll discover the most mysterious, scary, and fascinating stories. Make sure to turn up the volume and get ready for a spine-chilling experience you won't forget. On the morning of July 12, 1968, the members of a Special Forces unit stationed in a remote outpost of South Vietnam gathered for what seemed like a routine mission briefing. The war had been grinding on for years, with countless missions into the heart of the jungle, each more dangerous than the last. The assignment for that day was simple: a long-range reconnaissance patrol LP deep into enemy territory. Their objective was to gather intelligence on Viet Cong movements in an area where contact had been lost with several other units. The commander laid out the details of the mission with a cold, methodical precision, masking the underlying tension that everyone felt. The dense jungles of Vietnam were not just a battlefield. They were a living, breathing entity, one that seemed to swallow men whole. The unit was composed of hardened veterans, men who had seen the worst of war. Yet, as they listened to the briefing, a sense of unease crept into the room, a feeling that this mission would be different, that something was waiting for them out there in the shadows. The team set out early on July 13th, moving silently through the thick underbrush. The air was hot and humid, thick with the scent of rotting vegetation and the distant sounds of unseen creatures. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the jungle itself was trying to hold them back. By nightfall, they had covered several miles and decided to set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. As darkness enveloped the jungle, the familiar sounds of nocturnal life began to fill the air, the chirping of insects, the distant calls of animals, but there was something else, something that didn't belong. It started with faint whispers, barely audible over the natural symphony of the jungle, but unmistakable. The men exchanged nervous glances, each wondering if the others had heard it too. The whispers grew louder, but no one could pinpoint where they were coming from. The darkness seemed to press in on them, the jungle closing in, becoming an impenetrable wall of blackness. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and far too close for comfort. The men gripped their rifles tightly, eyes scanning the darkness, trying to pierce the veil of night. But there was nothing, just the oppressive darkness and the relentless feeling of being watched. Some of the men whispered that it might be the Viet Cong, but deep down, they all knew this was something different, something worse. The next morning, the men were on edge, sleep-deprived and tense. As they continued their march deeper into the jungle, the whispers followed them, lingering at the edges of their hearing, never fully revealing themselves. The jungle grew thicker, more labyrinthine, with paths that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Every direction looked the same, and the men began to feel as though they were walking in circles. The canopy above was so dense that even the sun could not penetrate it, leaving them in a perpetual state of twilight. As they pressed on, the tension between the men grew. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent their nerves into overdrive. They were not just soldiers on a mission anymore. They were prey, hunted by something unseen, something that didn't play by the rules of war. The feeling of being watched was constant now, an ever-present weight on their shoulders. The jungle was alive, and it was toying with them. By the third day, the whispers had become more than just an eerie background noise. They were now distinct voices, speaking in a language none of the men could understand. The shadows seemed to move on their own, flickering at the edge of their vision, only to disappear when looked at directly. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, and a thick fog began to settle in, further disorienting them. The men tried to keep their wits about them, but fear had taken root, deep and insidious. One of the younger soldiers, Private Thompson, started to crack under the pressure. He claimed to see figures in the fog, ghostly apparitions that beckoned him deeper into the jungle. His comrades tried to calm him down, but there was little comfort to be found in this place. The jungle seemed to feed on their fear, growing darker and more oppressive with each passing hour. That night, as they huddled together in the middle of their makeshift camp, they heard a sound that chilled them to their core. It was the unmistakable sound of children laughing, echoing through the trees. But these were no ordinary children. Their laughter was twisted, malevolent, a mockery of innocence. The men were paralyzed with fear, unable to move, unable to speak. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the laughter stopped, leaving behind a silence that was even more terrifying. On the fourth day, the men were barely holding it together. They had lost track of time and direction, wandering aimlessly through the jungle that seemed determined to keep them trapped. The whispers had become screams. The shadows had taken on the forms of the dead long-lost soldiers, their faces contorted in agony, reaching out to the living. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred, and the men were no longer sure if they were still in the jungle or in some hellish realm of the damned. It was then that they stumbled upon the ruins of an old French outpost, overgrown and decayed, a relic of the First Indochina War. The sight of it filled them with a dread that they could not explain. As they explored the ruins, they found signs of a massacre, bullet holes in the walls, bloodstains long since dried, and the skeletal remains of soldiers, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Among the ruins, they found journals written by the French soldiers, detailing their own encounters with the supernatural. The last entry spoke of a curse upon the land, a malevolent force that would claim the souls of all who entered the jungle. That night, the jungle finally revealed its true nature. The men were beset by visions of their own deaths, reliving them over and over again. The whispers turned into roars, and the shadows became solid, tangible things that attacked without warning. The men fought back with all their might, but their bullets had no effect on these otherworldly beings. One by one, they fell, consumed by the darkness that had haunted them since the beginning of their mission. As the last of the unit, Sergeant Williams stood alone in the clearing. He knew there was no escape. The jungle had claimed them all, just as it had claimed countless others before them. The shadows closed in, and as he stared into the abyss, he heard the whispers one last time. This time, they spoke his name. The mission was a failure. The men were never seen again, and the jungle returned to its quiet, indifferent self. The only trace of their existence was a single radio transmission that was picked up by a nearby outpost, a transmission filled with static, broken by the sound of children laughing. The story is steeped in an atmosphere of dread and uncertainty, where the jungle is almost a character in itself, a living entity that feeds on the fears of those who enter it. The characters, despite their training and experience, are reduced to terrified men, struggling to comprehend the horrors they are witnessing. Their feelings of isolation, hopelessness, and the gradual erosion of their sanity are palpable, creating a narrative that is as much about the psychological effects of war as it is about the supernatural elements. The tension builds as the men realize that their enemy is not just the Viet Cong, but something far older and more malevolent. The jungle becomes a place where the line between life and death, reality and nightmare, is blurred beyond recognition, leaving the characters and the readers questioning what is real and what is imagined. In the end, Shadows in the Jungle is a haunting tale of how war can break even the strongest of men, and how some evils are older and more powerful than humanity can ever hope to defeat. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Mystical Tales, so you won't miss out on more eerie and thrilling tales in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.